Yes. Yeah, just for you to know, the recording will be published on the website of the Network of the Jewish University Teachers um, after. Yeah, I think only the lecture and not the Q&A, but yeah, I don't know exactly, so maybe keep it in mind also during the Q&A that your questions and the answers might be published. Yeah, so it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Solveig Hennebert to you. I just asked her previously how to pronounce her second name. She said either French, Hennebert, or Hennebert, British, or Hennebert, German. Yeah, so whatever you feel like. Um, Solveig is a political scientist. She's currently working on her dissertation at the University Lumière Lyon 2. And basically, her university, I'm going to stop sharing this screen now with you. Basically, in her dissertation, she is also working on subjects that she's going to talk about today. Solveig, that's correct? Yes. This is basically dealing with the memories of anti-Semitism in France. How do Jewish people remember anti-Semitism? Why do they start to commemorate? Who starts to commemorate and who doesn't? And what are, yeah, the reasons for either of these paths? Um, she is exploring those questions of remembrance through fieldwork with Jewish people from different social, economic, political, and religious backgrounds. And what's maybe also relevant to share is that she worked on a master thesis that also dealt with remembrance, but with a very particular aspect of it, which was the remembrance of two convoys of political deportees that were deported from France to
Yeah.
Auschwitz. Um, Solveig also participated in collective research after the terrorist attacks in France in, when was that? 2015?
2015, yeah.
15, yeah. Okay. Yes. Solveig, thank you very much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. So I'm going to talk about work in progress. So first, I'm going to present a paper I worked on a few years ago, but I decided to rework it for my thesis. So I would love to have your feedback. Don't hesitate to share what you think. I'm going to share a PowerPoint. Yep. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Today I'm going to talk about remembrance of anti-Semitism in France, and I want to start with a quote by one of my interviewee, Camille. She said, "I thought about going to a commemoration, and maybe someday I'll go, but it's not an approach I'm really comfortable with." I thought this quote was very interesting because we tend to think that, or to say, Jewish people are the people of memory, but not all Jewish people do commemorate. And that was the starting point of this paper. And for instance, Camille, her great grandfather was deported and murdered in Auschwitz. However, she doesn't feel going to a commemoration. That was a second interrogation because we also tend to think that commemorations are people who attend commemorations, sorry, are the one whose family members were murdered, but it's not always the case. Also, in France, we have the concept of duty of memory, which means that one must commemorate and has to attend commemorations in order to remember the past. And I'm sorry, my cat is probably going to join us in a second. It's going to go forth and back during the whole presentation. I apologize in advance. So that was all the things I wanted to interrogate and actually ask how commemorations are perceived by Jewish people in France. and the idea to actually ask them and understand their practices. In France, there were several periods in remembrance of the genocide. First, Jewish people were considered to be political deportees, not victims of racial discrimination. And for a very long time, the state didn't want to mention the collaborations of the French authorities in order to protect the national unity. And this was very important for a very long time until actually 1995. For decades, Jewish associations mobilized and tried to organize commemorations and have the French state um, actually talk about the genocide and deportations, which Jacques Chirac did in 1995, and that was the first step towards national commemorations. Nowadays, there are many remembrance ceremonies. For instance, there are state ceremonies organized by the state, obviously, but also many religious ceremonies, many commemorations organized by associations. And there are commemorations related to the genocide and more recent events, which are also very important, like Edward mentions. I'm sorry, I think I mispronounced your name, sorry. One thing that is very important to me is also to take into account biblical commemorations because the Bible offers opportunities to commemorate, to grieve people, and I didn't want to only focus on what is outside religion, but to consider every Jewish people and to do so to also include biblical commemorations. And my question finally was, who are the Jewish people who attend those events? Who are they and who are those who do not? And how can we actually understand those practices? My methodology, so I base my data on observations of ceremonies and religious events. I've observed more than 22 ceremonies throughout 3 years. So I went to the same ceremony 4 years in order to observe if it was evolving or not. I also went to religious events and religious commemorations, not necessarily about anti-Semitism, but in order to actually understand better what was done in the religious communities. I interviewed around 60 people from a wide range of social, religious, political, cultural backgrounds. So from people who do not believe, who do not practice religion to Hasidic communities. Then again, it was very important for me to include everyone. Um, I wanted to talk about many subjects with the people, not only commemorations, because I've noticed that when you ask people about memory, they most likely will give you the answer they think you want. To give you an example, if you ask someone if they think that commemorations are important, most likely they will say yes. But I started to ask them, do you actually go to commemorations? And one person said, no, because I think it's boring. It's not interesting. It was for another work. That's why I'm not quoting per se here. But it's very important not to ask about directly what they think, but what they do. I also wanted to collect information about their political opinions because I was wondering if that was important, religious practices, family history, and so on. For my work, sorry, I coined the expression Jewish people or affiliated with. What I mean with this expression is that some people do not identify as Jewish, but they will be seen as such by anti-Semites and also will admit that they could be seen as such. I wanted to include those people in my work, but I didn't want to call them Jewish if they do not identify as such. So that's an expression that was very important for me and actually is quite important in my work. Um, and I base my work mainly on the theory by Maurice Holbachs. who is a French sociologist. And I don't know if you know him, but he was actually murdered in a camp during World War II. And he coined the idea of collective memory, individual memory, and a historical memory, saying that memory is always collective, it's a social process. Um, what he means by that is we always remember events within the society. For instance, when we think about the first political event we remember, we we see it as political because we learned its history later. But when we went through it, it wasn't like that. For instance, personally, my first political memory was when I was a child in 1995, and I was woken up by a demonstration against reform of retirement in France. But when I say that, it's not actually the truth, because when I was 5, I actually was woken up by a demonstration and I didn't know what it was. I'm not lying when I say that's my first political memory, but it's reconstructed, it's rewritten later, and that's what he means. And this theory is very important to me because he says that collective memory is strongly linked to one's social identities. So, is collective memory of anti-Semitism among Jewish people linked to Jewish identity or not? How the being Jewish may impact the collective memory and so on. So his theory is very important, and it's actually quite important in France more generally. Um, so based on all that, like I said, I wanted to interrogate how Jewish people as social beings remember anti-Semitism, with the idea that it's not because we say that memory is important in Judaism or the French state that duty of memory is important, that people actually do remember or all remember in the same way. Um, and basically, my idea is that there is a broad, there are very different way to act regarding memory. From lack of interest or involvement, it is observed that Jewish people do not all take part in remembrance practices in a unique way, and their investment may be shaped by family, religion, and school socialization. That was my starting point. And also, I wanted to emphasize the fact that the Jewish population is not unique, is not uniform. We know that not all Jewish people are Jewish in the same way, but also they are not only Jewish. So can we talk actually about the people of memory, and how can we in practice analyze remembrance practices? So first, I wanted to talk about remembrance of the genocide in France because it's a specific context, and it's very important to consider that it is rooted in laïcité, secularism in France, which is very important because the state or the state workers cannot display religious ideas. However, every commemorations organized by the state to remember the genocide have Jewish prayers in it because obviously Jewish people were murdered for being Jewish. So they are included, but it also should be noted that because of secularism, um, the the main law in France remembering the genocide does not name Jewish people. So the victims are victims of a genocide, crimes against humanity, but they are not called Jewish people because of laicity. So it's very complicated in France to consider all that. The main commemorations nowadays are the commemoration of the Veldiv Roundup, which you may know because it's so sorry about the cat. It's a commemoration of the main roundup in France, during which 13,000 people were arrested and later deported, with many children. And Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah is very important. It is organized both by the Paris Holocaust Memorial and Jewish liberal religious organization. And So those two ceremonies are the main ones, and they are very different. However, in both commemorations, it is mainly Jewish people who are in attendance. Doesn't mean that all Jewish people go there, but actually it's and I noticed that mainly Jewish people commemorate anti-Semitism and very few non-Jewish people do so. For the commemoration of the Veldiv roundup, it there are non-Jewish people who come here, but they are invited as writers amongst the nation. So they are invited specifically for their relations to the genocide. So I do not deny the fact that the Jewish identity must be included in my analysis. However, I do think that it's not the only thing, it's not the main driving force that lead people to go to a commemorations. Otherwise, we would see the hundreds of thousands Jewish people in France go to commemoration. Then how can we understand that? That led me to consider the triggering factor. That was something that I worked on for quite some time. And I noticed that, yes, Jewish people go there. Yes, Jewish people whose family were murdered go there, but not only them. So, what is it? And in most cases, it's a triggering factor. People will go because they have the opportunity. For instance, Camille, which I quoted in the introduction, said to me during the interview, no, I've been to the Holocaust Memorial because it wasn't really my initiative. A girlfriend of mine worked there. We met by accident on the eve of Yom HaShoah. It came up in the conversation because some people were talking about it next to us. And I think I may mention that one of my great grandfathers disappeared in Paris during the Shoah. As she told me that I should go to the memorial with her the next day, and I went. But I don't think I would have done it on my own. So, what's important is it's not a personal decision. Her friends convinced her to do so. Also, they didn't talk about it on their own either. It's because they heard someone talk about it in the table next to where they were sitting. And many people mention going to commemorations with friends, family, and when you go to commemoration, you can see that the grandparents, the parents, and the grandchildren are there together, and they all read the name of the member of the family who was murdered together. On the opposite, another interviewee of mine mentioned that she went to Auschwitz with her school. She goes to a Jewish school, and then she wanted to go back to go to commemorations because she was moved during the trip to Auschwitz. What is interesting is Camille, her family was murdered during the genocide. However, my other interviewee, Anna, her family wasn't. But Camille doesn't want to go to commemorations, and Anna does. So family doesn't explain everything. And so Jewishness doesn't explain everything. Family socialization may, in some cases, because people go with family, but it's not always the case. So, yeah, sorry, I was a bit late on my slides. So, how can we understand all that? Basically, Jewishness in itself does not explain attendance to commemorations. Even if mostly Jewish people go, not all of them do so. Family history isn't a satisfactory answer either for the same reason. So I went to, I tried to find another reason that could explain the differences, and I tried to work on religious socialization. Is it a satisfactory explanation of memory practices? In my thesis, I wanted to interrogate how religious socialization impacts or not remembrance of anti-Semitism, um, especially because I noticed that religious people, that may be called sometimes orthodox, but I do not want to use this word in my work. We can talk about it in the Q&A if you'd like. So basically, most religious people do not go to commemorations unless they are rabbis or they go to represent their local communities, then they do go. And there is another practice that is very common in France, is that I don't know if you know the Lubavitch in Germany. Yeah, so they are very religious and they try to have Jewish people come back to religion. And they tend to go to commemorations, but to do their own thing to invite Jewish people to join them and to leave the commemorations. Basically, it's more complicated, but say it in a short way. So it's there is a difference depending on the religious community um, people go to. Sorry, and I try to also consider biblical commemorations, like I mentioned, and I base that in part on religious uh, holidays, for instance, Tisha B'Av, Passover, or Yom Kippur. It's actually very complicated to say those name in English, and knowing you speak German, I don't know which accent to use. And apart from that, there are many rites of remembrance in the Torah and in the Jewish Bible. And actually, for some people, it's very important. And the saying "Dachor" is actually very much used in France. It means remember. You have to remember in Hebrew. And many of my interviewees, the non-religious ones, say that's why they remember. However, for religious people, that's not the proper way to remember. I'm going to illustrate with a quote. So this quote is from an interview with two rabbi students in front of of Yom HaShoah commemoration, and I don't have many informations about them because they were there with the rabbi seminar and they didn't want to spend too much time with me because it wasn't part of the day. However, I could record some answers, and one of them said, Yom HaShoah corresponds more to a human need because there are people who need to have that. The great rabbis of Israel also set a day of remembrance, but they set it for Tisha B'Av, a date that marks all the great catastrophes of the Jewish people in their relationship with God and with other people. They made it into a separate event, and then it was tempered with later Yom HaShoah ve'Agvura, the day of the Shoah and of power, because we don't want to say that we were sheep going to the slaughter. We also want to say that we were powerful. So there is a lot of pollution around these moments. But in any case, all the festivals of the Torah, when we talk about Decher, Dachor, remembering, when we study the context of the term, it's never what we turn into the duty to remember. That's not what it's all about. It's not just a matter of remembering that such an event happened. It's really about living, experiencing a present event. This quote is actually very interesting because Tisha B'Av is a holiday remembering the destruction of the first Jerusalem temple and then the second one as well. And for many religious people, it's the only moment that people should remember any catastrophe that happens for Jewish people. So for him, taking part to a commemoration like Yom HaShoah is actually not important because it doesn't matter. What matters is the Bible. And in the second part, when he talks about it's about living, experiencing a present event. He also refers to Passover and Seder tradition and to relive the events. So with this, we see that there is a real difference between religious people and not religious people. Um, that's a first explanation. But also, I took into account mourning practices that are very important as well. For some people, it's the only way we should remember those who were killed because of anti-Semitism. First, because for some people, it's actually a personal grief for people who know someone who was murdered, especially recently, or even during the genocide, but who were members of their family. and it's sometimes very individual. So, for instance, another interviewee of mine who is also a member of the Lubavitch movement, sorry, said, oh, sorry, I forgot to copy and paste this quote. I'm going to read it slowly. So to commemorate victims of anti-Semitism, we need to study, to talk, or even eat, to do all of this in memory of such a person, of his or her soul, and by saying Kaddish and reciting Torah discourses, teachings. Well, in fact, we dedicate them for the elevation of his soul, because every year on this date it is his birthday, and so his soul rises even higher. In any case, for someone who was killed because he was Jew, his soul has been branded with a red hot iron, and it is at a very high level. And it doesn't change the fact that every year on this date we say a prayer that is very important, even with the passing years. At the moment we say the prayer. Here, this rabbi is actually talking about a victim of an anti-Semitic murder in the past few years in France. I'm being vague, so you don't know who I'm talking about to respect the rabbi who would be recognized, maybe recognized if I said more. So he's talking about the Yahrzeit, which is the anniversary of the murder of a person. And for him, that's the only way one should remember anti-Semitism, through those grieving practices. All of that led me to conclude that Jewish people are not the people of one memory. Of course, from a sociological point of view, people may be discussed as well. But anyway, it's not one memory because people do not all remember the same way. There are many factors that must be taken into account: religious socialization, but also gender, education, history, family, and a social position of individuals. We can talk about more about that if you'd like in the Q&A. But the idea is to go beyond the illusion that we have sometimes, because it's only Jewish people who commemorate anti-Semitism, not only, but say, long story short, and to actually understand it in a sociological point of view. All that being said, I actually then wanted to explore the idea of a career that was coined by interactional sociologists like Becker in the US. Because when I talked about the triggering factor, I thought it was interesting at the moment, but later I thought, okay, it's interesting, but it's not enough. Why do people keep commemorating after the triggering factor, what some don't? And I also know that presence at an event does not mean people adhere to what it means to the ideology. This was explained by Nicolas Mariot in France. Um, so all that was, I kept thinking about all that and how can we actually explain what happens, which led me to Howard Becker, who talked about deviant career and says that a career, the way someone enters a career and keep doing something, must be understood through the person's characteristics in interaction with the context. All that can help us understand the final behavior. And in France, Muriel Darmon, she worked on how people become anorexic using this concept. And this actually what helped me understand the situation. She demonstrated that anorexic people all share similar characteristics. They usually are white, middle-class, young women. Not all anorexic are like that, but most. But not all middle-class, white, young women are anorexic. However, they all share these characteristics, so that's the starting point. And in France, Olivier Filiol, a sociologist, worked on the idea of activist career. What he means by that is that after Becker, but also Goffman, we need to understand that at um, the notion of career helps us to understand. And I quoted the whole paragraph because I thought it was very, very interesting. He said, when applied to political activism, the notion of career allows us to understand how, at each stage of a person's biography, attitudes and behavior are determined by past attitudes and behavior, and in turn, condition the field of possibility, thus restituting periods of commitment without the life cycle as a whole. The notion of career makes it possible to work together on the issues of predisposition to activism, the passage to action, the differentiated and time-varying forms taken by commitment, the multiplicity of commitments throughout the life cycle, defections and displacements from one collective to another, from one type of activism to another, and the retraction or extension of commitments. When I read that, I realized that all that could be said about remembrance and memory, and that was very interesting because a social characteristic has must be thought in relation to the context. We can't just extract them, and that's the idea of that was my idea with triggering factor, but it's the whole idea of the initial engagement when we talk about a career in Becker, like Becker. And Jewishness may be the the predisposition to commemorate. However, other characteristics and the context must be taken into account. And basically, uh, it was to use that to thought about commemoration. Sorry, I and the initial engagement, which I used to call triggering factor. So, for instance, initial engagement is based on personal circumstances, environment, and social characteristics. One example I find very interesting is I was talking to a woman who survived the genocide. Her parents were murdered, but she survived with her sister and she was a child. And when I met her, she said, well, I do testify in front of young people. It's very important. It's my duty. But she started to testify because her great grandchildren, they started studying the history of the genocide in school, and they asked her questions. And that's why she started to commemorate, because she went to her great grandchild school. So it wasn't by chance. It was the context that led her to start and testify. Another interviewee of mine, he took part in the organization of the first Yom HaShoah in France. And he also says that it's obvious he had to do it because he's Jewish and he was moved by everything that happened. But he also explained that the year before this commemoration, his girlfriend died in a car accident, and he started to commemorate her. And he also found a way to commemorate the genocide with Yom HaShoah. So it's also related to a specific context in his life. Those are very specific examples, and it's not always that obvious. But that's what led me to be able to explain that no, it's not obvious that Jewish people are going to commemorations. It's context. When we talk about career, we have to think about identity formation. And the I observed that people who do commemorate are the one who also studied the idea of duty of memory in school. And there is actually a resonance between the memory as they see it in the Jewish traditions and what they study in school. For instance, David said, I don't think there is any limit to commemoration. Well, after all, you shouldn't commemorate everything, but I think it's important to show that the state shows the things that are important and that there is a duty to remember whatever memory is in question. And I think yes, it's important. It's something that has to continue because it's all about remembering. So more than I find the places of commemoration, because commemorations, well, you go to them because you have an approach to them. You go because you want to find out about it. It has to be something you learn at school. Sorry, there are some spelling mistakes in that quote. So for him, it also he felt comfortable in commemorations because it resonated with what he had learned in school about the duty of memory. And also, with the idea of career, there is the question of commitment, why people do commit to commemorate. And it's mostly because they share political values or political ideas with those who organize the events. Even though the organizers say that commemorations are not political, they often are. There is always a political message, even though it's not related to any political party. For instance, in France, there are two main commemorations of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. One of them is organized by Neben, which is people who was founded by people who were affiliated to the Bundist movement from Eastern Europe. And the other one is organized by the CRIF, which is an organization representing Jewish association in France and is often seen as on the right wing of the political spectrum in France, even though it's more complicated. And people tend to choose which commemoration they feel more comfortable with and to go to that commemorations. But sometimes people stop going to the commemorations because they disagree with the message and they disagree with the idea that is carried by the speeches and so on, which sometimes may lead to exits of people exit the career, which depends on the cost and opportunity. For some people, it would be very complicated to leave because their whole family go to commemorations. So they they would be left aside in a way. For others, it's actually very easy. Like the rabbi student I quoted earlier, for him not going back to commemorations makes sense because he went there because he had to with his studies. However, he wouldn't go back because it doesn't make sense to him, and he has other opportunity to commemorate. So yes, Jewishness is important, but considering everything else that the people, the individuals are. Um, and I also wanted to emphasize the importance of interactions because most times the situation is explained by people who are confronted to other commemorations. For instance, the student rabbi I quoted was so clear about his opinion because he had to go to an event he didn't agree with. So I found that interaction is central in my study and is very important to understand how Jewish people remember. So again, it's work in progress. I would love to have your feedback. Don't hesitate. But I wanted to conclude on one thing. First, not all Jewish people are Jewish in the same way, which is why not all Jewish people commemorate in the same way, but also Jewish people are not only Jewish, they also have a gender, political opinions, and so on. And all that may impact their remembrance practices. Thank you very much. I hope I wasn't too long.
No, you were not. Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. Um, I'm gonna send some applause. Um, okay, so yeah, thanks a lot, Solveig. We discussed that actually we would want to open the mic for everyone at this point. So yeah, here is the opportunity to comment or ask questions to all of you. Are there any thoughts, any questions, any comments? I'm going to give you time to think about it. I'm not going to break the ice. Okay, I'm going to break the ice. Um, um, yeah, thanks a lot for those thoughts. I could relate to it a lot because I have dealt with commemoration myself because of my biography, but also because of my work. My artwork deals with commemoration a lot, and the question of like who is commemorating and who does not, and how, and all that, and also how does it change through life. Yeah, it's something that has preoccupied me a lot. I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to just start with one very specific one that came up when I listened to you. Um, uh, when I listened to your talk, I was always thinking about the Ashkenazi community in France. And I don't know if this is just my projection, but I was very interested in what your experience was with the Jews that came from mainly Northern Africa, I think, so the Mizrahi community in France, which I think is very present in terms of numbers. So, did you include like both communities in your research? Did you see a kind of difference that you could relate to those yeah, biographic backgrounds or not?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, actually, in France, it's mostly Sephardic Jewish people nowadays because many Ashkenazim people were killed or left France. There are some differences. First is the idea that Sephardic people tend not to feel comfortable talking about it because their families were not persecuted during the war. And actually, it's not always the case because in Tunisia, 1,000 Jewish people were deported and murdered. And I actually met someone whose family member was murdered in Tunisia. And when I asked her to do an interview, she refused, saying, "Well, I'm not Ashkenazi. I don't have anything to say to you," which was also very shocking to me. And I do think it's related to public policies in France because in France, when we talk about the genocide, we only talk about Ashkenazi people. We do not talk about Northern Africa and everything that happened in the colonies. And also, it's very interesting how people consider being a victim of the genocide. For instance, I met a woman who grew up in Argentina. Both her were from Poland, and one of them left before the war, the other one left after the war. And actually, her grandmother and many of her family members were murdered in Poland during the genocide. But she also at first refused to answer to me, saying, "Well, I'm from Argentina. I don't have anything to say to you." So there is kind of censorship. People do censor themselves, thinking they do not have a lot to say. Especially, it was actually very disturbing because I always said it doesn't matter if you or your family suffered from anti-Semitism. I won't talk to any Jewish people, but there was this censorship, and I think that's the main difference, basically.
Yes, please, Joseph or Joseph.
Joseph. Yeah,
Joseph.
thank you very much for that lecture. I have two issues. The first concerns the question of witnesses and the loss of witnesses. I guess that these commemorative events in France, like in Germany and everywhere, have considerably changed in the last 20 years. And my suspicion is that this also has something to do with emotions, that whether emotions are present or not. And what interests me is whether similar commemorative events are being initiated for more recent anti-Semitic events or practices in France that happened in the last 10 years, or even for 7th October. And whether you see differences if such memories, commemorative events have crystallized. And the second issue is more general and theoretical. You rightly refer to the central role of Maurice Halbwachs, his conclusion that memory is reconstructed in inner societal practices. Yet I wonder how useful the concept of collective memory is, especially since you rightly emphasized that there's not one memory, neither does a society commemorate. It's an individual, people, and discursive practices. So that's why I think social memory is the more useful term than collective memory. And in my opinion, from my experience, I think we should really abandon the term collective memory. But if you do not agree, why do you still think it's useful, the term?
Thank you very much. Both questions are very interesting. Yeah, the loss of witnesses is always mentioned in France, but it hasn't changed a lot yet because there are still witnesses who can testify. What has changed is how they talk about the present. For instance, after the terrorist attacks of 2015, in many commemorations, people said during World War II, the police was the enemy, and nowadays the police are the ones who protect us, which was a huge shift in the memory. Not everyone agrees with that, but it was the very common, even with survivors. Um, the idea is to try to still convey emotions through if it's not witnesses, it's family of witnesses and so on, and the have also testimonies by video or things like that. And your question is very interesting about similar commemorations because there are many commemorations about terrorist attacks or anti-Semitic murders, but most times there are no witness who testify. So while we talk about the loss of witnesses about the genocide, people do not ask more recent witnesses to testify. And I actually thought about that because you asked a question, so thank you very much. And they are very political, and it's very complicated because after the terrorist attacks, the French state said we have to be united, and sometimes again they refused to mention anti-Semitism and the fact that Jewish people were targeted, which led to anger and a feeling of being abandoned by the French state. But it's also during those commemorations that it's the same rituals. So people light candles. It's the same psalms. It's the same prayers. So it's the same commemorations, but for different events without the testimonies. And for Maurice Holbach's, yeah, it's actually a very interesting question. So I do have to say that Maurice Holbach is not is when I discovered his work, it was amazing for me. So I do for sometimes I didn't read anything else. I do not actually use myself the concept of collective memory for many reasons because I am not interested in how the society remembers, but how individuals do. But social memory is actually very interesting and it's very important because indeed it emphasizes the social processes that are important here. Um, I wouldn't abandon collective memory because I think it's useful in some cases, but very precise when we want to talk about the fact that the memory is an interaction between history and individuals' memories. And this concept, in this case, is very interesting when we want to show that organizations or the states, they, even though they say we have to remember it that way, because every individual has memories, then it's the interaction between history and those memories, thus the collective memory. But that's it. That, I don't know if that answers your question. Thank you again.
Any other question, comment?
Also, thank you to the person who commented in the chat. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you another. Sorry, Oglit,
Yeah,
you were
no,
unmuting yourself.
yeah, it's just very difficult for me to speak on the train, and that's why I left you on the WhatsApp a question. And thank you very much for the very interesting lecture, Solveig.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna check my WhatsApp. All right, so here is Oglit's question. How central is the commemoration of Yom HaShoah in France? In Germany, it is unfortunately not very present or official. Our network tries to change it. So how is that in France? Seems to be different.
It's huge. I wouldn't be able to say how many people attend because it lasts 24 hours, but I would say it's hundreds of people. Um, and again, many people go there to talk about their family members, to read the name of the family members who were murdered. But there are also very specific events like viewing of movies, of documentaries, and something that is, I don't know, I don't think it's in Germany because it's a book that was written in France. It's Sefer HaShoah, which is written like a religious book, but about the Shoah. And there are several readings for Yom HaShoah, and it's actually very interesting because many people go there and Yom HaShoah is it has become kind of a very specific event because in the morning the consistoire, which is the central organization that talks a central Jewish organization that is supposed to interact with the state for Jewish people. It was created by Napoleon. It's basically inspired by every Christian organizations and was a way for Napoleon to make sure that Jewish people could integrate to the French society. So it has very deep history. And the consistoire, which is more orthodox than the liberal, they organize prayers and this seminar for rabbis, and later on a religious service in a synagogue, very religious synagogue, which is also the opportunity to commemorate more recent anti-Semitic events. So, for instance, the sons of Mireille Knoll, who was murdered a few years ago, once went to Yom HaShoah to light candles in memory of victims of the Shoah, but they were there as the children of Mireille Knoll. So it's very important, but it's kind of very weird commemorations. It's first organized by liberals, but then other people went with their own rituals, like the consistoire. And sorry, I'm smiling because it's a very exhausting event to observe. And I've actually seen many people argue and yell at each other because they didn't agree how to commemorate. And it's huge, but it's always changing and adapting to the context. And it's just in Paris. For instance, in Lyon, there is another commemoration, but it only lasts 6 hours. It's very long, but compared to the 24 hours in Paris, And in some other cities, it happens as well, but it's mainly because in Paris, it was organized by the liberals.
So I would have another question that somehow relates to what you spoke about now, and it is about the performativity of commemoration. I was following your analysis of differentiating kind of from Jews, like very religious Jews who would not commemorate the Holocaust in such high numbers as maybe secular Jews would do, or as you call them, those people who are affiliated to Judaism but wouldn't consider themselves Jewish. Um, I also thought it was interesting when you referred to the, as you call them, like the biblical commemoration, the religious commemoration, the holidays that you named. And I was thinking particularly about two holidays. One of them is Pesach, obviously, and but the other one is also Purim, which both we could say commemorate events of oppression. Pesach also of liberation, or both of them also of liberation, and they are both very performative. And so the question of performativity, I think, in commemoration plays a big role. And as we know, when it comes to the Shoah, there have been also a lot of debates about the question of how um, mm, of how much the commemoration could be actually, I would call it like dramatized, or how dry does it have to be? Um, like I'm referring to the debate of the 80s when Lanzmann published his documentary Shoah, where he actually set the standards of how to commemorate in a secular way um, um, the Shoah with distancing, or without using forms of dramatization, and thereby he was providing a contrast to many other forms of commemoration that had happened before. So how would you say that the secular commemoration that takes place in France, how would you assess it on the level of performativity? Like if you compare it to the religious, as you call them, the biblical commemoration, which has this clear set of even performative rules. I mean, of course, we can all bend it, and we can all use like different forms here and there. But in the end of the day, for example, these two holidays, they're very clearly set out in terms of how we perform that commemoration. Yeah. So how would you see the aspect of performative commemoration in
Yeah.
in this secular um, commemorative events?
Thank you very much. Actually, for Yom HaShoah, the rabbi who started it tried to find a way to do it in a performative way, and that's why he started to read the names of the Jewish people who were murdered. The idea of having a right to be more Jewish, because indeed there is this idea that we have to do something and so on. And he wanted to read names in, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it in English, in German. I know it's a German name, but I won't try to pronounce it. But the books of memory, the books of names that were first written in the Middle Ages with the names of the people who were murdered. And that's why they started reading the names. And actually now reading the names has become the main way of commemorating anything in France. And the examples of Pessah and Purim are also very interesting because I talked about the Sefer HaShoah, but there is also Megillah HaShoah, which was inspired by the Megillah of Esther and thought to try to commemorate with Jewish rites. Indeed, Pesach and Purim are often mentioned as celebrations of liberation. Um, but the comparison is only made by rabbis actually in interviews, and the only people who mention those examples as good ways to commemorate and to think about liberation are rabbis. Other people mention it, but they do not make the link between those commemorations and what we could do in a secular way. Um, but there is definitely different influences, and um, the but mostly for non-religious people, because religious people will mainly talk about Tisha B'Av and not Pesach and Purim. Um, when we talk about commemoration, sorry. Um, Also about the question how to dramatize commemorations. Um, yeah, Lanzmann was actually very influential in France. But at the same time, it was Serge Klarsfeld who was very important as well. His father was murdered in a camp, and his whole life, I think you may have heard of him, but he chased Nazis and so on. And he's the one who found actually all the names of Jewish people who were deported from France. He is he created so many things. The memorial Shoah memorial was created because he found all those names, and he for him what is important is history. So for every commemorations, when he's there, he reminds everyone of history and what happened. He doesn't really care about religion, and I think that impacted as well the way it's commemorated in France. And going to a commemoration when he's there, it's very interesting because you learn so much. Even I learned a lot every time. Um, and at the same time, um, he he created an association for children of Jewish people who were deported, and they organize most commemoration in France, but every time it's only 10 or 20 of them and me sometimes. So it's very those are very small commemorations, but still because he's so important and he's been everywhere, it impacted definitely the way everything is commemorated. Um, and the thing I think that is very interesting as well in France is most commemorations organized by Jewish people, the, they emphasize that we have to name the one who were murdered or persecuted, but not the one who talk now. So, for instance, for Yom HaShoah, the president may read some names, but he's not going to be named as the president because he's here for those who were murdered. So it's the idea of to dramatize is not very present in France, and most times when there are when we read names, people are here to read names, and if they do something else like read a poem or tell the story of their family, it actually seen as taking time out of reading the names basically. So it's all centered on the names and maybe the history as well, but not so much emotions. If that makes sense. There are specificity depending on the commemorations, but
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions? Solveig, do you have any questions to us?
no, I just want to thank you all for being here and your very interesting questions. Because when I talk in France, usually people don't know a lot about anti-Semitism or Jewish people. And or they don't know a lot about memory. So it's really nice to have questions about the heart of my work. And thank you because all your questions led me to think about many things, and I that will definitely help me. Thank you.
All right. So thanks a lot, Solveig. Thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts with us. Um, yeah, one thing that maybe we could also take with us and think about is like how I don't remember whom of your interviews said that, but how basically what we commemorate relates to the present.
Mhm.
Um, and this is also something that I yeah thought about, like while you were talking, I thought about the question of October 7th and how
Mm.
the commemoration of yeah of those I mean, Joseph, you also mentioned like more recent events.
Mm.
You also mentioned October 7th, but now you have the 10 years in France of the terrorist attacks. And yeah, it's gonna be very interesting also for us to look at how this is going to evolve, and also like how we can also contribute to these questions of commemoration. And yeah, particularly because I think the forms of commemoration, like when we speak about the Holocaust, when we speak about the Shoah, that the way of like when we speak about um, this um, not non-religious ways of commemoration, they were very influenced also by a certain zeitgeist of the post-war area, and now it's like a couple of decades later. So yeah, I'm like just from an artistic perspective and from a
Mm.
visual arts perspective, I'm very interested in how the more contemporary ways of commemoration
Mm.
are going to shape
Mm.
out.
Mm.
All right. So thanks a lot, Solveig. Thanks a lot, everyone. I'm going to stop the recording and say goodbye to everyone.